People can sometimes find inspiration in the strangest of places. Artists in particular are quite well known for being inspired to paint by some truly weird stuff. But joking aside, the point is that any given person might find themselves inspired by the most unlikely of things, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's even part of the reason why they say art is subjective, because what may mean nothing to one person might be the greatest thing in the world to somebody else. As they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure. However, while I would never knock down somebody for finding hope and inspiration in anything, as long as it's not something evil, that is, there are a few things I've heard about that I find very hard to believe could actually be inspirational to people. And the chief one, hands down, is Luke Skywalker's portrayal in The Last Jedi. Now, there will be spoilers for this movie ahead, as well as any other movie I bring up as well. So in case there's something you don't want ruined, you might just want to be on the lookout. I won't be giving out any other spoiler warnings in this video. Alright, so I know The Last Jedi is a very divisive movie, with some people loving it and some people hating it. But I'm going to try and keep my opinions out of it, as I've already made them quite clear in my video The Last Jedi Doesn't Understand Star Wars, which you can find a link in the description to. So the point is, because opinions on this movie vary so wildly, it honestly isn't too hard to see how some might view the depiction of Luke as the ultimate mockery of what the character is supposed to be versus the most inspiring portrayal of a hero ever. Now listen, as I said before, if you find the way he's presented here inspiring, that's fine. I'm not trying to take that away from you. But that being said, I don't get it. I just don't get how somebody could find the man who was supposed to be the ultimate hero instead fall to the ultimate low and become a miserable failure inspiring. Now, before you start running to the comments to tell me that nobody actually feels that way, or that only trolls would make such a claim, let me assure you that there are people who've really said that and meant it. And according to them, seeing that even the one man they believed could never break, be broken, and then redeem himself is something that they find very inspiring. And while that is a nice sentiment, I find it a somewhat flawed one for a couple of reasons. Because for one thing, how much you're going to agree with that depends on how you view the ending. Because to some, that's Luke's ultimate redemption, and to others, it's the ultimate cop-out and amounts to nothing. And for another, the Star Wars saga already told that story in what I believe to be a much more effective fashion in Darth Vader. First, we see the great man that he was in the prequels and Clone Wars. Then we see how he falls to the dark side because of the Emperor and becomes a monster, and how he finally redeems himself because his son had faith in the man he once was. And I believe this works much better because Vader's story was always one of failure and redemption. So when he finally decides to turn on the Emperor, you feel the impact of that moment. And I'm sorry, but Luke's story in The Last Jedi was never supposed to be his story, and therefore is liable to make the whole thing feel disrespectful and cheap as a result, even if that's not what was intended. To put it another way, Anakin's fall and redemption is a much better take on a great man who was supposed to be a hero, losing his way but eventually finding redemption. The point of Luke is that he was supposed to become the hero his father could not. So to just give him the same story all over again in a slightly different fashion completely misses the point. But at the same time, I also see where these people are coming from. Most people believe that they can be a success and get everything they ever wanted if they just put their mind to it. But sometimes things just don't work out that way. Sometimes, whether through circumstances within or beyond their control, everything goes wrong and they become a person they never wanted to. And for these people, I guess seeing somebody like Luke Skywalker, a man they always thought would be nothing but the greatest hero ever, become so broken and lose his way just like them, but still ends up redeeming himself in the end, can be a source of comfort for them. But here's the thing. I don't believe that's a healthy mentality to have. If your biggest source of comfort in life is watching a certified hero fail at everything to the point that he can barely do anything to redeem himself, then I'm sorry, but you're at a pretty bad place in your life. Because here's the thing. The point of a hero isn't that they're the best at everything and don't have any weaknesses. The point of a hero is that they overcome their weaknesses to let them do extraordinary things. In fact, that's kind of the whole point of George Lucas's story. Anakin Skywalker was a great hero who couldn't overcome his weaknesses, and thus became a horrible villain. While Luke Skywalker is able to overcome his weaknesses at the crucial moment and stand up to the Emperor, preferring to die a hero rather than live as the monster his father had become. And it's only by doing this, only by showing strength at his most vulnerable moment, that allows his father to finally overcome his own weakness and redeem himself in one final act that, at least should have, restored the galaxy to peace and prosperity forever. My point is, it's the moment Luke doesn't succumb to temptation when he's most likely to that people find inspiring. That's the moment most people who've lost their way find comfort in. Because it reminds them that the next time they are faced with a similar choice under similar circumstances, they always have the option to be strong and do the right thing. That is why Luke Skywalker was such a hero to many, including his own fallen father. So to take that all away from him is to take away everything that scene said and meant to all those same people. And once again, even if the angle of the great hero losing his way and failing miserably before redeeming himself is something that appeals to you, then one would think that Anakin's story would be a lot more compelling than Luke's. Because not only is a lot more time dedicated to showing both his rise and fall, and not to mention is pretty much set up that way from the start, but it also has a much more satisfying conclusion. Because again, at least Vader's redemption actually means something. Even if he doesn't get to do much, at least his final act is one of the most important ones in the history of the galaxy. And that's probably a major reason why it appeals to people who think they've lost their way in life. Because even though Anakin became a hated monster, he was still able to find redemption and still do something worthwhile with his final act. And I will admit, that is something I have a much easier time believing could be a comfort to people. Because as I said before, the difference is that Luke was never meant to be a failure. That's clearly not how his story is meant to go. Like I said, he's supposed to become the hero that his father couldn't be. So for that to be ripped away from him, made into a failure who didn't accomplish anything, and for his redemption to basically amount to nothing, can feel like a slap in the face to people who were inspired by his actions in the original trilogy. And again, for somebody to find him in that movie inspiring, especially since Star Wars already told pretty much that same story much more effectively, just feels a little sad. I mean, please forgive me for saying this, but I'd have to imagine somebody being in a pretty depressing place in life to find something that feels almost sadistic, intentionally or not, in nature as inspiring to them. Because, as I pointed out before, there are similar stories that are better told with a much more fulfilling and optimistic ending than this one ultimately is. And speaking of that, let me leave you with this to think about. I have a friend who said I could share this story. Now, he's a bit of a movie buff like myself, but he also has had many self-esteem issues, often feeling that he would amount to nothing. And to him, Luke's portrayal in The Last Jedi was an insult. Again, you're free to disagree with that, but that's how he personally felt. He felt that Luke Skywalker's story was meant to go completely differently, similar to what I had argued earlier. So, needless to say, he didn't take any comfort in that movie. Instead, he once told me that one of the most inspiring movies he ever saw was The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, of all things. And I'm not referring to the 2013 Ben Stiller movie, but the original 1947 version starring Danny Kaye. Now, just in case you don't know, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty tells the story of an unassuming magazine editor who's pushed and ordered around by everybody in his life, and thus escapes into elaborate daydreams where he's always the ever-talented hero to cope with it. But after meeting a girl that's the splitting image of the one in his fantasies, Mitty soon finds himself caught up in a plot involving stolen artifacts that must be protected from getting into the wrong hands. But this being a comedy, hijinks ensue much more than legitimate espionage and assassination attempts, even if there are still some of those to be had. Now, what's my point with all of this? That my friend related to Walter Mitty in this movie. He's a man who feels inadequate and like he has no agency in his life. He feels he has nothing to look forward to and that he's unlikely to amount to anything, which is why he daydreams so much, in order to feel better about himself. And when caught up in an actual dangerous situation, he naturally panics quite a few times, and a few times only makes things worse for himself, thoroughly proving to be out of his element. But it's what happens at the end that my friend says he finds so inspiring. Being determined to rescue the woman of his dreams, and not to mention the only person in the whole movie to show him respect and treat him like a human being, Mitty is finally ready to confront his fears and be the brave person he has to be in order to save her. But things don't go so well for him at first, however, as the bad guys let him rescue her as part of a ploy of theirs. So once he finds her, they both end up captured. But rather than standing there and cowering like he had previously, Mitty actually decides to take action, attacking them any way he can, and ends up tackling the head guy when he tries to get away. And then after he finally stands up to everybody in his life and gives them a piece of his mind, letting it be known that he is not going to be pushed around any longer, and finally gets some actual respect, and not to mention a promotion, from his boss in the process. Now, the reason my friend found that ending so inspiring is because it gave him hope that he could be like that. Seeing Mitty, an unassuming coward who lets everybody walk all over him, actually attempt to fight off the bad guys at the end, despite knowing that it could very well cost him his life, as well as actually managing to stop their leader from getting away, really spoke to him. Probably a lot more than the movie intended to, honestly. But it was the fact that Mitty was never meant to be a hero, but proved that he had it in him when he needed it most anyway, that he found so inspiring. The fact that if everybody had their way, he would have been nothing but a cowardly NPC in his own story, and is still able to become the hero he never thought he could anyway. The hero he always dreamed he was, but never thought he actually had in him. So long story short, because he related so much to Walter Mitty, he found the movie's ending to be a very hopeful one for him. Now I know that's just one personal story, so please take it or leave it as you wish. Because as I said at the beginning, people can find whatever they want inspiring, and as long as it doesn't motivate them to hurt people, it doesn't really matter what that is. I was mainly just using that story to drive home the point that more often than not, people find an unlikely hero a lot more inspiring than a true hero becoming a failure. Because most of the time, people like to believe that they can be better than they are. And that's exactly the message The Secret Life of Walter Mitty sent to my friend. And while it can be comforting for some to know that even the best of us can lose our way or become a failure for a little while, I still believe that The Last Jedi is frankly too brutal and unwarranted in its approach for it to really come across as inspiring to most people. Okay, that's everything I had to say on that. So now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that the depiction of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi is one that's more harmful than good, or not? And how do you feel about that in relation to my friend's story? Please let me know what you think in the comments below. And once again, if you find Luke in The Last Jedi inspiring, that's okay. The point of this video wasn't to bash the people who think that, but more critique Rian Johnson's writing as far as that story went. And also, please try to keep the conversation in the comments civil, as I only want to have a conversation, not a huge argument. Because it's okay if you disagree with anything I said in this video. You are just as entitled to your own opinion as anybody else is. And thank you all for watching. I very greatly appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.